What's up? What's up? What's up, everybody? You are listening to the Data is My Science podcast, the show that makes data your passion. I am your host, Dapper Data. I have a special guest on today, and I'll introduce him shortly. But the topic that we're going to have today is something I haven't done before. Okay, we talk about data, we talk about programming, we talk about. I brought guests on where they had nothing to do with data science, but they actually did with their career. So we've talked about a variety of different topics, related to data science, everything from ingest all the way to analyzing to visualizations, all that good stuff. But we never really took several steps back, which is probably the most important thing, really understanding what data is, right? Really achieving what we call data literacy, okay, which is an essential step to a company's roadmap. And we'll talk about that in a few when I bring on a special guest. But more concretely, it's when you think about data literacy, it helps employees make data driven decisions. Okay. It helps them interact with data critically. It helps form effective data governance, you name it. Okay. So understanding what it means within your organization, that's what we're going to talk about today. And I brought on a special guest. His name is Kevin Hanegan. All right. Kevin is currently the chief learning officer of a company called Qlik, which is a data driven or an analytics company. He has also been a chair of the advisory board of the Data Literacy Project and author of multiple books, including what you'll hear a little bit more about today, Turning Data into Wisdom, how we can collaborate with data to change ourselves, our organizations, and even the world. So, Kevin, thanks a lot for being on the podcast today. I'm glad to have you. Tell them a little bit about yourself.
Absolutely. Well, I appreciate you having me too. I'm really looking forward to it. I have I guess, an interesting background. So, undergraduate, when I was younger, I was a techie. So I went to school for computer science, math, statistics, and started getting a few jobs there, but always had a passion for learning and understanding how, we make decisions and think, and the psychology aspect of it. So over the next few years or so, I ended up going back and getting degrees in things like one's called organizational performance and workplace learning, how we improve performance at an individual level within an organization. And at the company I'm at now, Qlik, data and analytics software, we teach people how to use analytics software and work with data to make better decisions. And I just had this light bulb moment. It was 5 or 6 or 7 years ago, where we're teaching people how to look at a correlation. We're teaching people how to build a bar chart or look at a pie chart. But the most important question was the question no one was asking, and it was the question we weren't teaching, which was, why am I doing this?
Oh,
Why
yeah.
am I building a bar chart? Like they're just so excited. They follow the lab and there's a bar chart and everyone's excited, but I don't know if they really understood why and why it's important to understand if there's a correlation and what it means or they're not. So I started doing a lot of research and passion on, as you said, data literacy, trying to make sure that everyone today makes decisions with data. And we think about data as like numbers, but data is anything. It's reviews on websites. It's what you see in the news. It's just everything. And so we all make decisions with that, but we don't fully understand that the decisions we make with that information data sometimes are faulty, sometimes they're misleading. And that's really what, data literacy, and we'll get into it later, is for me, is it's helping us really understand what that data means and how we can use it to gain insights.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's definitely interesting because you started off as a techie, like you said, but you got into something and you found a unique niche,
Yeah.
right? That a lot of people kind of skipped over, right? They say, hey, I'm going directly into this one path related to data. We talked about before, there's so many different paths that people take related to data, but they almost skip past the why, right? The why that you mentioned, right? They're skipping past why am I doing what I'm doing when it comes down to data science, or data in general. I even have my own use case where I think about why did I do certain algorithms, right? When dealing with machine learning, right? I'm sitting there and they're like, yeah, they said to do, logistic regression, right? For this, or the K-means theory, right? For this. And I'm thinking, why? I never thought why until it probably took me about 2 or 3 years later to say, why am I doing this, right? Because they're almost making it so easy in this world, right? Technology wise, for you to just use the tools without having to ask the question why. And it seems like the benefit, if you understand the reason why you're doing it, you actually can become more successful, in the future. Do you see that?
Absolutely. I mean, it's a great point. We ask why, not just to know, just for the sake of knowing why. It's not because we just need to know. It's because maybe knowing why informs us that we shouldn't be doing a k-means clustering. Maybe we should do a different type of clustering, or maybe we shouldn't do
Right.
logistic regression. So the why is like, oh, now I see what you want. And sometimes people, when you ask the question why, they'll give you an answer, and it's hard for us to sometimes challenge, right? And so, I would want
Yeah.
people to be like, why do you want to do that? Like, how does that tie to your organizational goal? What's your outcome? You get the
Mhm.
answer. What are you going to do differently? And if you can't answer that, and you can't say how that input is going to be successful and help your vision of your organization, it's a waste
Mhm.
of time. So why is a very simple question, but it has many, many layers. I mean, we spend weeks talking about why. But it just opens a new mindset to people. And I think that's one of the big things I'm trying to educate people on, is it's not just tech skills. It's, if anything more, it's a mindset change than
Yeah.
anything.
And I look at myself when I think about the why. I honestly think more work, right? Because and maybe that's why I'm lazy about thinking the why sometimes, right?
Yeah.
Because you actually have to, and understanding the why means you have to do more research on that specific topic, when it's so easy to just use a tool, right, and just come up with the result, you know. So that's what I see as my mindset, especially if I'm somebody that doesn't really understand it as much, right?
Well, I mean, so here's a perfect example. So I'll equate it to one of my kids, right? One of my kids is learning multiplication, or they're learning long division, and they'll come home and they're like, "Dad, I'm really mad. What's going on?" Well, I got the right answer, but the teacher, marked me off 10 points. I'm like, "Why? Were you?" And we're like, "I didn't show my work." And I'm like, "What do you mean you didn't show it?" Like, "I just wrote the answer down." And I said, "Well, good lesson, right? Good parental moment. 101. Okay, son, sit down. Why do you think it's important to show your work?" And he's like, "Well, I guess if I didn't get it right, then the teacher would know where I messed up and she could correct me and I could learn it differently." And I'm like, life moment, right? When you're doing long division, there's only one right answer. Now you
Mhm.
pivot to business, where everything's much more complicated. There's tons more data. There's probably 20 different viable answers for every decision that you make. Showing the why gives you the breadcrumb trail to understand where maybe you have a wrong assumption, you have an outdated mental model, or then even take it further, you decide on something, you act on it, it doesn't come out the way you want. Now you have knowledge log. You can go back and be like, "Oh, here's where I made that mistake. Let's go back and change it."
Yeah.
So it is, we're trained almost to be lazy, and we're trained to assume everything we do is correct. But that's the important thing now in this world. There is no black and white. It's not binary. And so showing your work is critical, so you can see those 200 options. And I messed up because I assumed this was going to happen and this didn't happen. I can
Yeah.
much quickly pivot than if I just show the final answer. He still doesn't show his work, but I
All
think I got
right.
through with him. I think you
Yeah.
learned.
I mean, the calculator's here, right? So
Yes. If there was a calculator for taking in context and bias and assumptions, I'd use it today. I guess
I
that's the
know
problem.
I would too. But understanding the why would be so much better, right? Why are you even, they make it so much simpler, but understanding the why is important, like you said. So would we say, right, if I was to say data literacy, if I was to define it, right, in a sentence, would you agree that data literacy is having the ability to really read, to create, and communicate data as information, effectively, right? I mean,
I would agree with that. I've seen tons of definitions and they all sound similar. And one of the ones I hear a lot too is read, work with, and challenge. And sometimes it's communicate instead of challenge. And it's all accurate. I guess the part that is important for me to get across is I don't know if people really know what that means. Like if I walk up to a typical person who's not data literate, or it's not yes or no, but it could be more data literate, and I say, "Do you know how to read, work with, and challenge your data?" I don't think they're going to have a clue what I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm.
So it's wordy, but I like to try to do definitions that are more, what's the outcome? What's the action? So those are steps. But to me, the action is making the most informed decision with data. And sometimes that means you're going to get a statistical report from a colleague and they're going to tell you something with 95% confidence interval. Data literate
Mm-hmm.
means understanding that's not foolproof. Don't bet the whole bank on it if you can't. There's still a chance. And when it doesn't come through, it wasn't the wrong model. It just means 5% of the time it wasn't going to work. When you get a data point and someone's like, aha, I found the answer, challenging
Mm-hmm.
data means questioning if they really found the data or if they have confirmation bias. Are they just seeing what they want to see? And so, when you follow those steps of thinking about challenging the data, going back to, again, my kids and stuff, they learn the scientific method in school. You come up with a hypothesis, you do everything in your power to try to disprove it. And then only when you've exhausted everything. But I feel like in the business world, you mentioned lazy before, I'm not going to say we're lazy, but we see a data point and instantly it confirms our beliefs. And we're like, I have the answer, move on, next. And
Yeah.
we're not trying to actually challenge it. So data literacy is about not trusting the number blindly, but trying to question if it's wrong. And then if you can't break it down or make it look wrong, then moving forward and assuming it's correct. So that's what data literacy is to me. It's about whatever level you are in the organization or individual, whether you're an exec or a consumer, however you interact with data, you can interpret what you're getting. It doesn't mean you have to be a data scientist, but then you can also challenge it and ask questions and challenge assumptions, and then you can communicate it out to people in a way that they don't need a PhD in statistics to interpret it.
Right, right. Oh man, I just have so many questions, man. I don't even know if it's a podcast for this, right? Only because I'm just thinking, as you're bringing about all this knowledge related to data literacy, some of the things that come to mind is, everybody's not on the same, wavelength as far as or skill set as far as understanding data, right? So you may talk to somebody that is a data scientist that still needs to understand data literacy, but they understand enough to be dangerous, I guess, if you want to use some type of phrase or something, right? They might understand how to challenge, right? Something, because they might have, or they got their PhD, right? So I'm working on my PhD now, and I know that a lot of times I'm working on, you have the hypothesis and you're really trying to figure out how to disprove something, right? I'm going through my dissertation phase. I'm thinking about how people are probably trying to disprove, right, what I'm trying to go through my dissertation phase. So at a certain level, I may understand certain things, but then I may not understand everything, right? And then you have people that are in a very novice stage of understanding data, right? And they're in the same organization, so you almost have to teach them differently. If I think about a football team, right, and I'm a coach on a football team, and most all the kids I cannot coach the same. They're all different, right? Some may react to hardcore yelling at them, saying "Get it together," Some may just break down and cry, right, because they don't respond well to that, right? So I have to really talk to them, and they might want to understand why I'm moving from this one gap to another, or something. I'm moving from this one position to another. I understand the why, but they need to understand why before they actually perform well. So you probably see that a lot, right?
You do. I mean, it's a great analogy because in a practice, I assume if you're on the defensive line or similar, you're not practicing throwing or catching the ball, right? Because it's a different skill set. And I think that's
Right.
why data literacy also is kind of abstract for people, is it does depend on your role. And so it's
Mhm.
not yes or no, it's a spectrum and it's tied to your role. So you mentioned the data scientist, like, they're hardcore statisticians, but they still need to know how to challenge their assumptions. So they're training their model.
Mhm.
What if, tons of examples in the news where people did like the self-driving cars and the mistakes were that they didn't challenge
Right.
their assumptions with the bias in the data. But then you go all the way down to the consumer who just gets the output of something and they say, yes, we're going to look at loans and we're going to default on this one. And they need to be able to say, okay, I can't just blindly trust that. I want to know why. I want to look behind the black box. I want
Mm.
to see the work. And then you have the leaders who come up with the decisions and the actions, and it becomes a change management practice. And if they communicate the same way to all of their stakeholders, they're going to fail because every stakeholder has different data levels. So maybe you communicate to the data scientist, but to the consumer, we always talk about in the classes, make the visualization, because everyone uses data visualizations, make it map the output. So we see people build these complicated visualizations and then they share them. And they share them to someone who doesn't even know how to use Excel. And they're looking like, that's too complicated. I just trust you. And that's the worst thing you can do because we're trying to teach you how to just trust them. Trust the people, but, challenge the process, so to speak. So I think the football analogy or any sports analogy is spot on. You have different positions. And I think, as you said it too, you have different levels. So I can't expect the rookie to have the same level of proficiency as the all-pro. It's not going to happen. Right. You have to get them there. And the worst thing you can do to someone is hold up that Hall of Famer and say, you're going to be like them tomorrow. You set them up. You have to kind of slowly show them that progression, right. Which again is an abstract concept for people. They just think data literacy, is like the other literacies, like reading, right? But if you think about it, you're not a master reader in first grade. You evolve over time.
Yeah. I mean, I'll tell you one thing. If I was a rookie in the NFL and you said you must be like this Hall of Famer, I might run away, man. Or even if I'm in middle school playing football or high school, right? And say this is what you must be like, right? And you really want to take those baby steps to get there, right? Because you don't understand the exposure and the experiences that they've gone through to get to that point, right? So it's definitely different levels of the ways you have to probably educate them from a data literacy standpoint to get them to become the Hall of Famer, right?
Absolutely. And one thing you said, I think is critically important because I always say it's a team sport and it really closely parallels like diversity and inclusion. The other thing you would say is if someone said middle school, you want to be like that Hall of Famer, is I want people to say, no, I want to be like me. And what that means for data is you want diversity because that person might have a different background. They might have different perspectives. They might have different beliefs. And because of that, they might unconsciously have a bias. Their view is based off of that. Not saying it's the wrong answer. It's just you want to get another view and triangulate and corroborate. And to do that, we need everyone to bring their own experiences. So it's actually, trying to teach them that you don't want to copy the next person. You actually want to bring yourself, which is hard for many of us, bringing our full self to work. A lot of us can't say we can do that. But that's why I love data literacy is it's about that too. It's about bringing your actual self because you have something to contribute based off your experience that other person doesn't have.
Man, again, Kevin, I have a ridiculous amount of questions, that probably would extend past this podcast, but doing a lot of research on you, Kevin, I did get to understand that you work a lot with organizations, right? And data literacy is one thing, right? When you're doing one-on-one coaching, that's one thing, right? But then when you're on the level of an organization, right, an enterprise, right, and trying to create a data-informed organization, how do you create that? How do you see yourself creating that? When working with a lot of your the organization.
Yeah, it's not easy, right? Because I think we said it sometimes it's an abstract concept. Like people want a cookbook, and the cookbook is really personalized depending on what the organization is trying to do. But I do think there are some key tenets. I mean, first and foremost, for me, coming from a learning background, it's about starting with education for people, what it is, what it isn't, how it can help the organization. We've done studies that shows 70-80% increased ROI for organizations that have higher data literacy. That also requires other benefits too of having it be innovative, great places to work. You have less attrition. And I think one of the times I see challenges is when organizations try to bite off more than they can chew and set a goal that's unattainable. I'm a huge fan of, going in incremental steps and agility. So I think one of the biggest things we found success is find a project that is ripe for data literacy, focus on that, get the outcomes, get the RRI, do the case study, do the internal win report, and instantly you'll have people in the org being like, oh, wow, look at that project. They just did it faster, quicker, cheaper, better than we ever could. That data literacy thing must be real. Let's look at it more. And you kind of internally almost do a marketing campaign by starting small and growing big. I guess one of the other big things that we found is I'm a huge fan of grassroots efforts, but if you don't have leadership support, it's not going to work because, again, one of the tenets is challenging data. So if you go into a meeting with an exec and the exec says, I think we should drop this market and go over here, and you stand up and say, I disagree, look at the data this way, and that person gets fired or reprimanded because it's not their culture to talk up in front of execs, no one's going to talk up in front of execs. So you kind of need to have that buy-in where they're like, we're changing our culture, we're changing our mindset. The many is better than the few, and you all have great perspectives. We're all going to give you the empowerment, the mindset to be more data literate. Now, challenge me.
Right.
You have leadership that does that, the innovation goes through the roof, the productivity goes through the roof. So, I mean, those are two. I could speak for hours, but those are two things that I think anyone could, take away and start with.
Right. I mean, those are great. Do you ever see when trying to create a data informed organization, do you ever see where, they're actually missing pieces within their organization where they need to actually hire, right? Like maybe data visionaries or something like that. You're saying, hey, look, you got great pieces here, right? And I can work with you, right, in educating everybody that's here on it, but you're missing this one piece to it.
Yeah, and sometimes it's not just resources. I mean, at a high level, I like to look at it is you need the right tools and technologies. I'll explain that in a second. You need the right processes, and then you need the right people and enablement. One example from a tools point of view is if the consumers, we'll go into an organization and we'll do a baseline assessment, and we'll say, how do you use data to make decisions? And they're like, I don't. I just gut feel, right? It's gotten me this far. It's gotten me, and we'll ask many times. The answer is, I don't trust the data. So if they don't have data that's trustworthy or trusted, then they're not going to use it. And so that's where the tools and technology, right? Having a data catalog, having a data integration capability, having data governance and data strategy. So maybe you do bring in a CDO to help with that and processes. Not saying everyone needs to go all the way up to advanced analytics and predictive modeling. You can do a bunch of stuff with just descriptive analytics, but you've got to have that data strategy because if they don't trust the data. But then on the very far end, sometimes we see challenges where the people who need to make the decisions and the people who own the data speak two different languages, and they need better communication. And so we've seen a lot of companies be successful where you literally have a translator that communicates between the data team and the business team and understands both sides. Because, we talked about it, if the consumer says, I need to know how my sales presentation or how my marketing campaign went, you could have the data team go off and make a million assumptions about what qualifies as good, what's the success criteria, what was the marketing campaign. But they could spend days building this model and completely miss the point of why. And so we have some orgs that educate on the why, and then we see other times you bring in these translators that connect the dots for people to get things rolling. And those have all been helpful as well. But definitely the technology piece in place. Sometimes there's key roles like I mentioned the chief data officer, just to inform the processes. A lot of times the HR function is there to help with the culture component and make sure that people have this safe environment for challenging.
Yeah. I mean, like you mentioned, resources are important, but also maybe tools, right? Personnel, processes in place and things like that, so they could be missing any one of those, and you're able to help inform them about, filling in that void, right? That's an awesome, I think, position to be in because this is something, like I said, I think is a unique aspect to data, that, and it's really funny because if you really think about it, it's it should not be very unique, right? But it's
True.
it's definitely something that is not talked about enough, right? And it's important, right? Because you're trying to create this data drive culture or data driven culture, amongst everybody, anybody that is in the organization, and many different pieces, to it, So with that being said, if you're communicating with a one employee right there, right, in an organization, or say a C-level exec, or depending on the role, right, it could be different. But how do you improve someone's decision making, right? Just one on one, right? You're communicating with them. If you were to, really talk to somebody that really is just off the street, right? Because it's important, right?
It is, yeah. I mean, in the book, Turning Data Wisdom, we have a bunch of checklists and systematic processes, but it really comes down to you're facilitating, you're asking questions. And it's not just why, but everything that they say, going back to what we said, you're asking them to show the work, you're asking them why, you're asking them very open ended questions like, is that all the data that's relevant? Could there be other data over here? The situation you mentioned, when could that not be true? And
Mm-hmm.
many times, what's eye-opening to execs, consumers, us as individuals, is when we're going through our decision-making process, and then we retrospectively look back, where we make the mistakes are not the technical side. They're the soft skills side. They're the human side. We have done everything to understand the technology, but we had an assumption that we didn't bring to light. And so we didn't bring it to light. No one could challenge it. So one of the biggest things I tell everyone is outside of work, pick a situation where you had to make a decision, go back and assess it and think about writing out your work. What were your assumptions? Why did you
Mm-hmm.
think this? Did you come up with other scenarios and rule them out? It's amazingly defined. I mean, unfortunately for people I work with, I do this all the time on them. We do this with, our school system with our kids, and it's amazing what you can find when you work backwards this way.
Yeah. I mean, those are great points. I mean, I find myself a lot of times when trying to make a decision, um, I think it takes some of the things you mentioned. I think it takes like patience, right? Patience to understand how to ask the right questions, right? Because I found it honestly has taken me, within data science, I'm meeting with customers. It has taken me years before I feel very comfortable with asking the right questions, to a customer, right? Uh, it it was at one point, I think initially when I first met with customers, I would just take what they say, right? And just run with it. And then I would have questions as I'm going through the process. Like, man, I should ask this. Let me go back, And when I think about my decision making, right, myself, right, I think about how now I take my time to ask myself, is this the right decision to make, right? If I'm switching jobs, right, just in general, it takes me weeks before I make a decision to really make a transition. Then before, it didn't take that much, right? It also took, if we talk about how, I could take your word that a company is great to go to, right? As a consumer, right? If I'm purchasing a table, we talked about purchasing a table. I could actually do research on it now. So consumers are now saying, "Hey, look, I want to do my own research along with the word of mouth that somebody's telling me," and that's going to help. Combining all that will help me make that final decision, right? And what I'm finding is that limiting choices, is a critical part of decision making, from my opinion. So when I have 10 choices, 20 choices, right, it's hard for me to make a crucial decision. So I start to eliminate those things, right? I remember Obama and Mark Zuckerberg, right, and even Steve Jobs. They had this thing about, or Warren Buffett, right? They had these things about decision fatigue,
Yeah.
right? So they would wear the suits all the time, right? That they would wear like one or two suits, right? If that. Or Mark Zuckerberg wears like the same outfit all the time, probably different, outfits, but the same exact blue jeans, white shirt, right? You always see him in that, right? Unless he had to go to court or something for the stuff that he had to do. But that eliminated so much in his life, right? When you wake up in the morning, you say, hey, look, all I have to do is pick this outfit, right? And then I go into work and I'm good to go, right? Is that one of the things that you try to help out with, maybe when dealing with your customers? When you're talking about decision making.
Yeah, so you mentioned decision fatigue, right? And technically in the brain, we call there's something called cognitive load. Like the brain can only take so much, right? It's a computer, and what I think we try to do is we try to minimize the cognitive load so that we can really use it for things that it needs to do well. And what I mean by that is there's things that decisions we make unconsciously. Like that's great. We don't have to think about it. We don't use any cognitive load. But at the same time, I don't want to spend 10 days deciding, what color t-shirt to wear for this podcast when I could be spending it on more strategic things. So, one of the things we talk about is prioritization. What are the decisions you need to make? And we classify those. Are those decisions that you can walk back from in the future? Because then it's okay if you're in a culture where you just want to agilely improve or just fall fast and learn, versus decisions where you materially change the business and there really is no undo button. That's where you want to focus more of the cognitive load. So we have lots of strategies you can use for the quicker type decisions, just to get it out there and learn from it. And then obviously a little more robust ones with the bigger ones. And there are always similarities. Like, again, I'll mention challenging assumptions is the biggest one. I'll give you a personal story because I think this highlights what we're talking about. And you can use these processes outside work. So one of our kids was having some issues at school, and we went to the team meeting, and the teachers had data, right? They had behavior data. What were the behaviors? What was the discipline? What was the consequence? And they don't know I'm a statistician at that time by trade. So they're saying, okay, lots of behaviors, and ultimately, long story short, is a bigger story, but they came up with an outcome where they were going to pull them aside and do more one-on-one work with them. And I just looked at the data again, and I kind of had this light bulb moment. And in my brain, quickly, I knew their decision-making process, and I knew their fault. And it was a fault that they didn't know existed. So looking at the data, what I saw was anytime that there was a behavior, the consequence was he go to the principal's office. And the mistake with that is the assumption the school made: kids don't like going to the principal's office.
I thought as soon as you said that.
So I go home, I'm like, hey, how did the day go? He's like, it's great. I kicked someone and went to the principal, and she read to me for 30 minutes. I think I'm going to kick him again tomorrow. Like, all of this work put together, the right decision-making process, and the fatal flaw in the process is they didn't challenge the assumption that no one likes going to the principal's office. They didn't get diverse perspectives.
Right. That's a great point, because if I heard something where I had to decide, whether I'm going to the principal's office or not, I'm not going to the principal's office.
Exactly, because that's the norm, right? Yeah. But there are people like my son that apparently love adult stimulation at that age. I mean, he was in second grade. So, but that's the point, is in business, we think like we know the world, and the world's changing so much. We have these assumptions that are not accurate anymore.
No, it's like checking the validity, right, of a whole research project, right? There's so many different, I guess, not barriers, well, it could be barriers, or just there's so many different assumptions that you're not taking into account, right, when trying to make this decision, right?
Exactly.
And so, it's amazing that you brought that up, because that happens all the time. It happens in everyday life. It happens in organizations, and it's funny, is it starts to make me think, who is the person that should be challenging? And I guess what you're saying is everybody in the organization should be challenging those things, right? Who should think about, well, they're not taking into account this, right? It's probably everybody in your role, at certain times where you're making a decision and you want to account for as much as you can, right? To make sure that it is that the accuracy or efficiency, is definitely better, than that. So Now that's a great point. So all right, we talked about data literacy, right? We got into a little bit about how the organizations, how you structure a lot of organizations when it comes down to helping them create data informed, well, creating a data informed organization, right? We definitely talked about how to improve decision making. Now, if you were to create a roadmap, okay, right? I mean, I know a lot of times there's processes in place. So if you were to go to an organization, maybe there's a roadmap from, step zero or step one all the way to step, I don't know, there's probably many steps in your roadmap, but maybe 20 of them or something, let's say. And it's related to your data literacy program or how you're helping out organizations. What would you say are the top three things to consider?
Yeah, it's a great point. I think the first thing is every organization, every individual is different. So it usually helps doing some type of baseline assessment, some baseline evaluation, because as you hopefully you learn through the podcast, data literacy isn't yes or no. It's not binary. It's a spectrum. So imagine this heat map of capabilities for what it takes for a data scientist, a leader, a consumer, all these different skills, and it's not feasible to assume that all of those skills are going to be green on day one. You're going to have gaps. And so what I like to do is do that type of an assessment so that we can visualize, with heat maps, red is lower, green is better, where you have your bulks of reds. And that can help us focus on areas to start with, because you kind of want to do the biggest gap first from that perspective. So if we have really good data strategy, we have really good data scientists, but we don't have a codified decision-making process, and that comes up red, and people don't know how to challenge, people don't know how to weigh risk reward, they don't know how to assess probabilities, that would be one of the areas that we'd focus on the roadmap first from a educational point of view, but then also putting in processes and policies and procedures that do make decision making a codified process, changing the structure of meetings so that they're not. And one of the big things we talk about is dialogue versus discussion, right? When you're in a meeting and you're doing a discussion, every person talking, the only thing they're interested in is getting the other person to agree with them, whether we like it or not. That's all they're doing. In a dialogue, the output's different. The dialogue is not to win, it's to understand. So many times when we see that in that heat map, that there's just no collaboration, we put in practices where we train on the benefits of dialogue. So in dialogue, everyone states their perspective, no one challenges it. You listen, you understand. Then you get the collaborative thinking, diversity trumps ability, and you start making better decisions. But if they already had that process, I wouldn't start there. I'd start somewhere else. So it really, starts with baselining where the strengths and weaknesses are. And I'm a big fan of, not ignoring the weaknesses, but hitting them first and early on in the process.
No, those are great points. And I would say, just that right there, right? The dialogue portion is almost like how you should communicate in relationships in general, right? I remember going to a couples therapy years and years ago, right? And they talked about how communication was so important, and even after that, right? They talked about how communication was so important, right? And the whole you're having a conversation with the person to understand, where they're coming from, right? And so you could take that in almost every aspect when you're talking to your kids, even, a lot of times being able to understand where they're coming from. If I was to talk to my son, and no matter what he said, I'm trumping him, I guess, or I'm trying to make sure that I let him know who's the authoritative figure every single time, right? He's going to shut down. It's not going to really get anything across, right? So
Exactly.
yes.
But I mean, you just said it, right? So paraphrasing what you said is, if I was talking to my son and I didn't listen to him, but then you understand why we have this. So think about schooling, right? You spend so much time doing reading. You spend so much time doing writing. Did you ever take a listening class? I mean, 75% of communication is listening, right? It's not reading and writing. Yeah, I've never taken a listening class. So, but it's a major form of communication. So like, I understand the challenge. I know exactly why we're there, but that's the problem, is we don't emphasize listening when it's probably the most important form of communication, because you get that understanding, you get the why.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. One thing I thought about throughout this conversation is, when throughout the roadmap, is there any point where you have to assess the skills of the employees? Throughout that process, you're training this organization, we're teaching them about data literacy, right? I know we talked about it before, how there's so many different levels or skill sets. Do you assess the levels of skill sets beforehand? I mean, the workplace is so diverse, and at the same time, you have modern employees. They expect more of that personalization, right, of the career and skill development programs to them, right? Do you see that?
Yeah, spot on exactly. Is the worst thing to motivate people, especially in a massive change management, or not massive, but in a change management, is force them to do stuff that either they already know or they're not interested in doing. So if we do like baseline skills assessments, the benefit is exponential. So first, they realize that if they passed out on these things, they don't have to take the mandatory training on it. But then it also gives them the self-awareness of, oh, I'm missing those listening skills. Those could really come in useful, not at work, but also at home with, relationships with the spouse and the kids. And then they're motivated to take it. And then by doing assessments throughout the change management process, we're able to show them progress. And that's what better motivates people than hearing, great job, you're making great progress.
Man, great point, man. Well, Kevin, this has been very enlightening. I mean, I appreciate you being on the podcast. And, I mean, I think we probably need to do another one, man. Once I gather all my questions, I definitely, I have a lot more questions, I'm telling you, or I'll just shoot your email and be selfish to the audience. I don't know. We'll see. But but as everybody always they know that I like to end with what I call a dope data nugget or some type of gem, right? So I like to summarize it. And so based off of this conversation, okay, if the audience is listening out there's a significant human impact to implementing data literacy, right? I mean, when you think about implementing data literacy in an organization, you're thinking about boosting productivity, you're thinking about empowering the workforce, right? Some of the things that you just talked about, that's what I feel like would really why data literacy is so important for the organization, and data is that what I call a gold mine. I always talk about it. I mean, they go Google or whoever it was mentioned how data is new oil, right? We skip past so many processes before we skip data literacy a lot, if that makes sense, and that can really help the organization drive growth, and so I really appreciate you being on. Is there anything that you want to enlighten the audience with as a final summarization?
Yeah, I mean, we covered a lot. I guess the key thing I want people to take away is data literacy is not a black and white yes or no. It is for everyone. And don't think of data as just numbers. It's all the information you see. Even watch the news, right? And you're being shown data. And in today's time, like some of that data is not accurate. It's not based in science. Some of it is. So you need to make educated decisions about that, not even in work. So again, it's not I like helping organizations become more data literate, but it's a life skill for everyone. We all get data, unless there's someone that never watches the news, never reads the newspaper, never looks at reviews, never leaves the house. Then it's maybe not for them. Otherwise, it's a skill we all need.
No. Great point. Great point. Thanks a lot, Kevin, for that. All right, time to have a little bit of fun.
Awesome.
All right. So, as the audience knows, right, that I like to play a game called Overrated Underrated, and I actually got this game from a mentor of mine, Gary V, who I listen to a lot on YouTube and all the different social media posts. But Overrated Underrated, basically, I will list to you, to the guests, right? I'll list to you, Kevin, probably a series of different topics, right? And you tell me whether you think it's overrated, underrated, or right where it needs to be. All right.
Okay.
Are you ready?
I think so.
All right. The Super Bowl.
Right where it needs to be. Well, I don't know if we have a global audience. I would say it's probably even underrated. I know it's the most watched television event, but it's for everyone, right? Like I like the sports. My kids like the commercials. This year, the halftime show was great. So I guess at that level, it's either right where it needs to be or underrated because it has something for everyone.
No, great point. I didn't think about how it actually has something for everyone, right? I mean, some people who really are hardcore football fans, that's great for you. You're there, or American football, you love it. You're in there. That's your time to really focus in, right? But then you have the halftime show. Some people really just watch it just for the halftime show. Some people watch it just for the commercials, right?
My kids,
So
I'll add the fourth in. My kids, it's one of the few times a year where they'll ask for takeout and I'll have to say yes. So they like the food aspect of it, the social aspect.
oh man. All right. Travel for vacation.
Underrated. I
Mhm.
am a huge, I mean, I don't like flying. I used to fly all the time for work. I've been all over the world, but just something about, not the actual process of traveling, but landing in a different climate, maybe a different time zone, being out of your element. So, vacation is rest and relax. I'm not a huge rest and relax. I like to like run around and do things, but I live in New England and it's 20 degrees out and snow. So if I want to go to Disney and have fun with the kids, I can't do that here. I got to travel for it.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
more options.
Are you a Patriots fan? If
No
you
comment, but absolutely. Yes. But I've always been, even when they were bad, even when I was growing up and they had the worst record in the NFL for years, I was a Patriot fan. So
Oh man, oh man. Okay, okay. All right. The hardcover book.
that's a tough one. I am a fan of hardcover books for very special books that you want to show and display. Otherwise, if it just is a casual book you're reading and you like, it's expensive. It's too expensive.
Mhm, mhm.
I'm a fan of Kindles and stuff like that, but there's just something old fashioned, nostalgic about an old hardcover book. I have a few hardcover books in my closet in my book, and I'll give them away only to special people. Most people get the paper book, but I think there's something special about a hardcover.
All right, all right. The zoo.
The zoo. I'm
Hmm.
going to say overrated.
Uh-huh.
Um, I,
No, don't
it's
let your kids hear this, man.
well, it's not their natural habitat, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, how would you feel if the monkeys drove by or lions drove by and I'm in a glass cage and they're watching me work? I'm not going to
Ah,
act the
good
right
point.
way. And it's
Good.
not about being PC, or I mean, I guess it is, but I just sometimes I feel bad for them. I don't know. I'm
Great
sure
point.
they're treated well, but I wouldn't want to be away from my family or being,
Yeah.
I'm an introvert. I don't want 100 people watching me work and go to the bathroom and eat. I mean, that's
Right.
just awkward.
Oh man, because a lot of times, right, you're coming from the wildlife, you're used to doing these things. Nobody's watching you, right, on a consistent basis. Your natural habitat is that, right, the wildlife, but then you're stuck in this area, this cage, right, where everybody's watching and they're, maybe banging on the windows, right, depending on what you're where you're at, and it does suck, right? It is something where it's like, man, you feel bad for them because that's
It's
if
not
we were in
natural.
that situation, we would not
Exactly.
be happy, right? Great point, great point. All right, cable TV.
Overrated, at least nowadays, right? I mean, I probably spend it's genius, right? If I add up all the subscription streaming services, I'm probably paying 3 times cable.
Yeah.
Um, but that's how they get you. So streaming genius. I wish I thought of that business model, but cable, I guess, is overrated because really what I'm missing is the local news that I can get online.
Yeah. I know I'm always told my parents were like, man, you need to have the news, but yeah, I'm a big streaming fan. I cut the cord, right? That whole cable cord,
Yeah.
I cut that years ago. And for me it wasn't I think it was the subscriptions were great. And again, like you said, if you have a ridiculous amount of subscriptions, right? Everybody has something that you may want, right? Even if it's one show that the other program doesn't have, right? And so you might subscribe to it, But the benefit to me of streaming services is that I can get out of them majority of the time when I want to. Right? I'm not tied to this contract, right? Where Verizon just says, hey, you have this whatever year's contract, and if you get out, you got to pay and all this crap, whatever, or something
Yeah.
like that. So
True.
uh, that's the
Well,
thing that kind of pisses me off.
true. And you said your parents mentioned the news. When I hear that, I'm like, I get the news the second it happens now. I didn't have to wait till 6 p.m. like you guys did when you were young.
Yeah, true. All right. Boston clam chowder.
Versus Manhattan clam chowder, no contest. I would say it's right where it needs to be. Probably underrated outside of New England.
Okay.
The cream base versus the Manhattan's, the tomato base. It just no.
It's not biased. Are you sure?
It's not biased at all. It's proven in science and data. Yes, these buds say otherwise. It's not biased.
All right. The last one, gaming.
I could go both ways. I actually see a lot of benefits of gaming for people that have certain social disabilities that want to use it as a way to, network and make better connections and communication. But I also see it as a way where people can just escape into an alternate reality and get soaked into there to the point that it becomes their reality and it's not good. So I guess I'd have to say neutral. For some people, it's bad, and for some people, it's actually really positive for them.
Right. Well, Kevin, it has been a pleasure. I really appreciate you being on the podcast. Again, thank you all for listening to the Data is My Science podcast, the show that makes data your passion. I'm your host, Dapper Data, and we had this very special guest, very knowledgeable guest on the call today. And, again, it's been a pleasure. Where can they reach you at, Kevin? And is there anything that you're promoting right now?
Absolutely. I'd love, if people are interested in the topic, they check out the book. The book goes through some methodologies and strategies and examples of how you can make better decisions. It's called Turning Data into Wisdom. You can just check it out on Amazon or go to my website, kevinhanegan.com. Either way, those would be the two big things.
All right, great. Well, audience, as you know, you can always reach me on a majority of social media platforms, LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, at Mr. Dapper Data. And also definitely check out my book called Making the Most Informed Decisions with Your Data Using Social Media Analytics. And again, audience, thank you for listening in. As always, I love you all. Peace.